Hello and welcome to episode 130 of Spatial Realities, your podcast for professionals involved in XR, spatial computing, and the metaverse. My name is Thomas Riedel, host of the podcast and tech journalist from Cologne, Germany. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host Thomas Bedenk, one of the most experienced XR experts in Berlin. Greetings.
Hi, Thomas.
Yes, as always, I'm very happy that you're here. We actually met last week at Republica, and it was nice seeing you in person again. I mean, it's really a rare occasion.
Yeah, we don't see each other very often. That's pretty cool.
Did you enjoy the Republica?
Yeah, it was nice. I mean, usual networking stuff, but I didn't spend too much time there. But meeting you and seeing a few talks, and then you had 2 talks as well, right?
I had 2 talks, one about humanoid robots and one about blogging. So old and new world coming together. And the same was, maybe you saw him also, our Secretary of Digital Affairs, of course, has been photographed with an XR headset on his head.
Yeah.
Of course.
It's kind of funny, yeah. Of course, he was talking about cloud and AI in his conversation, but then somehow ended up wearing a XR headset. Yeah, but I actually did listen to your robots talk. I say listen because while I was driving back to Berlin, I was listening to your talk, so I didn't see all the stuff you had on your slides. But yeah, nice. You're trying to get the next hype going before the hype starts. So let's see.
Yes, being in front of the curve. That's the idea here. Yes, but let's go to our topic of today, because we're once again picking up a talk I heard at XR Expo. As you can see, the XR Expo in Stuttgart has been quite productive for me and also for this podcast concerning interesting topics. So mark your calendars for the next edition of XR Expo at May 11th and 12th, 2027. And at XR Expo this year, I met Frédéric Plourde and heard his talk, Evolution of OpenXR from Cross-Platform XR to Spatial Computing. And I guess it is a good idea to speak about OpenXR and the role of Frédéric in the XR industry. He is XR lead at Collabora, outreach officer for OpenXR at the Kronos Group, and mentor at the XR Guild. So a lot to talk about. Welcome to the podcast, Frédéric.
Hey, thanks so much. How you guys doing?
How did you like the XR Expo?
It was great. It was great. Even though a lot of people said it was maybe smaller, I think it was actually smaller than the edition the previous year. It was great. I mean, we could harvest. I mean, I was there with my 2 hats, right? So as you said, I got 2 hats all the time. It's pretty much open source focus for both hats. So one hat is Collabora, we're consultants, and the other hat is Kronos. So I was there at the show, having a nice booth, presenting what we're doing. And I actually harvested one of the best leads in a few years. So it turned out great for us. So and as you said, I had talks. I could meet with a lot of people. Yeah, it was a great edition. Yeah.
Awesome. So to get things started, you might want to give us a short impression of where OpenXR actually stands today from your point of view. Before we actually get into more detail, just to give a little bit of a summarize of what OpenXR is actually today.
Yeah. So everybody that listens to that podcast, various levels of understanding what the OpenXR standard is. So let me just recap what OpenXR is, if you guys don't mind. So OpenXR is an open open standard, royalty free standard by Kronos. Kronos being a nonprofit organization. We may talk about Kronos specifically later, but OpenXR is this very open royalty free standards for just making it so easier, right, for XR developers to target multiple devices. So the initial goal is to be cross-platform, right, compatibility. You can, the dream is to just be able to write your application just once using that API, and it should be running everywhere, right, on all the XR platforms or devices that you're targeting. But also, but also it's royalty free. So it's really important aspect when you actually join and become an adopter. Now, the OpenXR standard in itself, feature wise, it is, as you said, my talk was about, talking about the recent progresses, recent advances of the standard, because initially I'd say like we were integrating the core features, right? What is XR? Yeah, like it's an XR compositor, some graphics, inputs, right? Tracking. But now so nowadays we're catching up ahead of the curve a little bit, and we are a fully, full-fledged spatial standard. And this is really important for everybody to understand. We are now integrating, the spatial entities extensions. We can now, we have now APIs for understanding the environments, the surfaces around the users, anchoring stuff on those surfaces, and also, making all this persistent across XR sessions. So that's really exciting. This is where we're standing now. It's always, as you might know, we're always a bit behind the vendor companies' agendas and super aggressive roadmaps, of course, because we're a standardization company, right? I mean, those things, they take time, but we're catching up pretty well these days.
You're not the innovation company. You are a standards organization. So of course you're not doing the innovation, but trying to standardize stuff. So that's probably also important to know. What does it take to make better futures possible for the world we live in, for our societies and communities, for our companies and organizations, for ourselves, and yes, even for the metaverse itself? Most of us don't believe in a better future merely as a theory. We believe it because we have experienced it on our own again and again. We have seen strangers become collaborators, communities emerge across continents, ideas turn into movements, and virtual spaces create very real emotional impact. So let's gather around our virtual campfire once more. Let's create a shared space that empowers us to imagine futures worth fighting for ourselves and for those who will come after us. We would love for you to be part of this journey. Join Immersive X from the 10th to 12th of November. Find more information about Immersive X at immersive-x.de and in the show notes. One thing we might want to talk now, because that might confuse some people, what the difference is between doing standards for XR and now spatial. Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit about that too, because what is the addition? What's so spatial?
Yeah. We're so spatial in the spatial extensions. Yeah. So if you want me to talk about the future of what we're working, so I might specify a few times during this talk. There's a lot of what we do that's under NDA, unfortunately. So I cannot really expand on what we're working on at the moment, but I can give you a glimpse or some glimpses of what's being worked at the moment. Now, specifically about the spatial part. Now, what is XR at its core, right? XR, it's just you're sticking a display on your head, right? Sticking a display in front of your eyes. You want tracking your hands, tracking your head, maybe tracking your body. And so there's controllers, right? This is mostly what XR is at its core, right? Controllers, controller input, hand input. Those basically like three things, graphics, display, and input. Now, of course, with mixed reality, right? When you want actually to have like CG content or virtual content actually, interact with the real world. You want that Pokemon to be able to run on your desk and just avoid the obstacles on the desk.
We all requires,
we all want that. I've been waiting for this for years. So you actually need much more circuitry, additional APIs. The companies that are part of Kronos have already mostly all, gone out with their versions of the spatial API. The spatial part is specifically about being able to detect surfaces like the desk, like the floor, like the ceiling, like the walls, right? So that your XR headset, whatever the implementation details are, we are creating an API. We've created API extensions for standardizing all that. So now the implementers of those spatial entities can say, hey, using our API, using the OpenXR API, you can actually, as an OpenXR developer, recognize and get a list of all the surfaces around you, what are and labeled, right? Are those surfaces desks? Are those surfaces walls, ceilings? And you can actually anchor stuff on them. So we have a couple of XR_EXT_ extensions, and I'll talk about what our EXTs extensions and, in comparison to the other types of extensions, maybe in a few minutes. But we are now 6 major extensions doing all that. So you can detect, anchor. You can also make all of those anchored content persist across across sessions. So a very, very simple example, right? Let's say as an XR developer, you want a virtual television application. You want to create all that. Well, that virtual TV, you're going to be able to let the users place very easily those TVs on the walls around them. And then they can show content on those TVs. And once they go in and out of that room, they're going to be able to retrieve and see, those TVs exactly where they left them. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about persistence, across sessions and across spaces. So this is where we are now. We've released those 6 extensions that are called spatial entities few months ago already. You can find, blog posts about them. We released as the Kronos Group, right? We had some announcements out there on the internet. So, yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Just as a last technical question before we go back to first, I would say, knowing a little bit more about you. But so you mentioned vendor platforms, right? Vendor SDKs. But usually it doesn't end there. You have the Android XR SDK, you have a Qualcomm Spaces XR SDK, you have a Unity development environment. Like how many layers do we need? What's the position of Kronos in that?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question because we've worked extensively on that aspect and recently, and this was all, by the way, part of my talk at XR Expo. So this is something I've been trying to make the OpenXR community understand way better. So Kronos, the IP framework that we're working on, the CTS and the compliant, the OpenXR compliance tag that we provide our members with once they apply and pass the CTS tests. This is only about the runtime layer, right? There are 3 layers actually, or maybe 4, and I can. I'll try to be really visual in my explanation. Figure at the top, the XR applications. You have the XR applications at the top. They might be immersive experiences. They might be through the web, web experiences. And those applications at the top, they don't talk directly to the runtimes. And this is the important bit. They talk usually through OpenXR, they talk usually through Unity, some engines, Godot, Unity, Unreal, or maybe more. You've got some XR frameworks like StereoKit that are being used, and are being bundled in the application. And those where we call the middleware layers, those components, they are the one actually talking OpenXR to the layer down there, which is the runtime. And the runtime, as you said, Thomas, the runtimes, what I mean by that are all the SDKs, right? So the Qualcomm Snapdragon SDK, so there's the Pico SDK, Meta, whatever. Those are the runtimes for which Kronos actually grants OpenXR compliance. So this is really important distinctions. Kronos, our IP framework, and the realms of what we can guarantee as an OpenXR compliance system. This is only runtime and device pairs. Our reach does not go all the way to the middleware components, which means that as an application developer, you could be depending on Unreal Engine's OpenXR plugin, which is maybe not, compliant in the sense that you would expect it, right? Or which is maybe pulling some vendor-specific dependencies under your feet without your knowledge. And this is really important, though. Yet, the system or the runtime and device that you're targeting is OpenXR compliant. But since your application is using an engine, it might not work everywhere else, right? And this is something that we should probably spend a good time. I mean, ask questions, guys, because I'm really here for this. Trying to explain why the OpenXR compliance guarantee in a way is not always met.
Yeah, so there's the compliance, and then there is the question of, is it actually compatible with the dependencies you have and so on. I think we can go into the weeds further later on, but usually I think we start with getting to know you a little bit better. So how did you get into XR? Like why did you end up in this industry?
It goes a long way. So I've been at Collabora, as you know. This is my main affiliation. So I joined Collabora, can you imagine, guys, like almost 18 years ago. This is crazy. And I kept, it was such a nice place to be and to work that, if I had to choose again, I would probably choose Collabora again. So been there for 18 years, started as a regular engineer, right? Walked up the ladder, out of pure passion, I guess. And my initial expertise was in graphics. So working on, drivers, Mesa. You have to know that Collabora is really open first. And this was one of the important factors when choosing Collabora. I was in open source, since I've been hacking at computers, really interested about open source, the methodologies, the best practice there. And so I discovered that company that's all for open source, right? Like at its core, at its raison d'être is to accelerate the adoption of open source in all of the industry. So that's how I started to be in that field. And then graphics, of course, hacking at drivers, open source drivers, sorry. That XR is kind of at the cross path of graphics, and and now AI, of course, machine learning, and a bit of multimedia. So it was kind of a natural way to me to evolve towards XR at some point. I was a principal engineer at the time, and I was just like offered, hey Fred, would you like to lead the XR division, because we need some leadership there. And that happened like 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I already, was in Monado and had some XR headsets of my own. But of course, when that started, now on my right here on the wall, I got like 8 XR headsets. So now it's like it's crazy interesting, because we're having so very talented XR engineers that I'm leading. Really, really feeling lucky. So that's how I got into XR, right, through Collabora.
Yeah, so that was since you say 4 years ago, 2022, that you started leading that part. Was that out of demand, or did someone decide we now need XR, or did clients knock on the door about XR? How did you form a division for XR?
Yeah, the XR division actually was a thing prior to me leading it, right? So, but by a few years, what happened is that we kind of found ourselves at Collabora having like super XR enthusiasts. Those engineers were working on, we're consultants, so we're working for our customers, right, on whatever they think we should be working. And then so we happen to have a lot of XR enthusiasts, I think like a bunch, 6 or 7, already pretty active on the Monado open source OpenXR project. And this is a project really important for you guys to know. Monado is the cross-platform open source OpenXR runtime. So those runtime we're talking about, Thomas, the Meta Horizon for Meta, or the Pico SDK or Snapdragon from Qualcomm. Those are proprietary solution. Well, some of them are open ecosystems, but mostly what Monado is exactly the same thing, but open source, cross-platform. You can grab the code right now. It's available to everybody in the world, and then hackers in the community are are actively helping us, build a stronger and more robust solution there. So anyway, so that's Monado, right? And we happen to have like maintainers of the Monado, like initial writers and the main maintainers of Monado project among our ranks at Collabora. That was 2018, right? 2017, 2018. I was not leading the domain back then. But what happened is that we thought, hey, we all loved OpenGL, those standards. We all, at some point hacked at OpenGL and Mesa, which is OpenGL being the graphics API right at the time. And then why not create a standard for XR now? Because at the time, 2017, I can recall, the API fragmentation was a real mess. So as an XR developer back then, if you wanted to target, multiple devices, let's say you wanted to target like 3 SDKs or different devices, you basically had to write 3 rather different applications. Yeah, because, the APIs were so different, the semantics. So what we thought, OpenXR got formed in 2017. So we joined the fund. We, got ourselves members of the Kronos group, and we pushed OpenXR support in Monado quite a bit. So that in 2019, in July, when OpenXR 1.0 came out at the Kronos group, we were part of the 2 first OpenXR 1.0 compliance. So Monado was, along with Windows MR, one of the 2 OpenXR compliant runtimes out there. So this is just we were, I guess, interested and at the right time, the right moment.
So you saw something happening here. You saw something happening.
Yeah, definitely.
What is a Collabora? Because I was on the website and I thought, oh wow, talk a little bit about what Collabora is actually doing.
Of course, I'm a big fan of Collabora. As you know, I've been there for 18 years. I'm totally in love with that company. So as I said, we're open first. I think there's only like 4 or 5 companies like that in the world, if I'm not mistaken, that are truly like open first. The work model for Collabora is really exotic and interesting. We're almost like 130 people in the company, most of which are being, engineers. We're an engineering consulting company. So low overhead, most of those people are engineers, software engineers. And the cool thing is that, so we got an main office in Cambridge, UK, and our second office is in Montreal, Canada. But I'd say like maybe roughly 40 or 50 people are there, like as employees. Like all the rest of our workforce, like that's a lot of people. We are just we're just sealing one-on-one contractual relationship with all those people spread out in the world in 35 cities and countries in the world. And that's a very cool working model, right? Like most of our workforce is 100% remote working, and all, top notch in their field. Collabora's got, as you said, it's not only about XR. Collabora is pretty much across the whole embedded industry. So we have a pretty strong graphics domain. Another one, multimedia. We got core, kernel. We also got a machine learning division now since a few years, and of course, the one that I'm leading, XR. So you see, it's pretty much across the whole industry. What we do is we're consultants. So companies, usually 500 Fortune 500 companies, they come to us, and here's the kind of stuff that we can do. Like, for example, hey, we have this infrastructure on this SoC. We'd like to switch to another SoC. Could you guys help us? Bring up all the driver that it requires on Linux for this new SoC. We're missing, support for this and that feature, and this is the kind of really core stuff that we do. So we're not application level developers, right? We don't do apps, we don't do games. We really are at the embedded firmware, middleware, and of course, sometimes kernel level. So if you have a phone, we wouldn't do the applications, of course. We would actually do the drivers for that phone to work.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do, but always open.
And just to understand the business model behind that, who's paying you?
That's interesting. So let's take it from the basis, right? Open source, right? Free and open source software, which is a keyword that we're so FOSS, right? FOSS. The free in there, right? Everybody knows. Everybody thinks that it means free, as in free of cost, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the case, right? It's free as freedom. And freedom has always been very central in my life, in my work life, and at Collabora, of course, it's a premium importance. So it means that there is actually money in the FOSS, in the open source world. And the model, I'm just going to reveal my secrets to you guys right now. So just listen up. The model is actually pretty simple, right? Consultancies, for-profit consultancies, usually they don't have, so they work for their customers and they don't have like R&D budget, right? But this is something that we do. It's pretty cool, pretty rare, but cool at the same time. For example, in my XR team, I manage like a budget, like an R&D budget, pretty ample one every year, that I can make some of my guys, some of my engineers, my folks work on open source project on my dime. So this is the key element to your question, meaning that I'm pushing R&D work, engineering development work on some key projects for us. One of which being Monado, of course, the OpenXR, the open source OpenXR runtime, and we make it better. We push those projects around so that they can actually get adopted as a basic for ecosystem work of big companies. And this is exactly what happened. For example, for Monado, and we released some communication around that. Monado's been adopted by Qualcomm Snapdragon SDK. It's now in Android. It's now in the Google Android XR. Monado is also running, at the core of NVIDIA Cloud XR. You see those top-notch companies that, elected Monado as the, OpenXR implementer in their core ecosystem. And so here, the last bit of my strategy is like, pushing those projects out there and those companies picking those projects they're at some point that you can be sure that they're going to be running into integration issue. They're going to want to, develop some new features around Monado. And this is how, we make a business out of that. Those companies come, knock on our door, and then, hey guys, can you help us, integrate to that new SoC? You guys are obviously experts in Monado. We need some help. And it's been working really great since 20 years. That's the whole key business model behind open source. That's it.
Yeah, sounds awesome, to be honest. You can do stuff which is free and helps the ecosystem, and at the same time be successful. Imagine.
Yeah.
Somebody
and
should
free,
tell.
exactly.
Cool.
The free aspect of the free as being like no cost still is a thing, right? It's a thing, but it's more for our community, and this is really important side of what we do. The OpenXR community. We are in constant communication with them. So of course we're on Discord. Monado's got a Discord server where we can interact and, get in premium contact with those, just enthusiasts around the world. People in their basements, just getting excited. They just bought an OpenXR headset and they want to have Monado on that. We're providing support on our own, on our own budget. So that's what we do. Yeah, this is an important part.
I think that's it's almost like a whole topic by itself. Like, I think a lot of people misinterpret what free and open source and what these things actually mean, and how much money is actually coming from enterprise into open source. And
true.
So it's also not equal sovereign if it's open. Like there's a lot of different angles to it, I think. But it sounds like you're very passionate about the openness and the freeness, not in no cost, but free.
Yeah, well, because it's a good model, right? 15 years ago, I can recall I was explaining what open source is to pretty much everybody, right? I was talking to. I mean, it was not really well known. I think it's gotten much more, better understood nowadays. But big companies, they understood that you can't reinvent the wheel, right? You want to have like a new ecosystem. Think about Google Android XR, that basically they just figured that, hey, instead of building OpenXR compliance from zero, why couldn't we, base ourselves on something that exists and seem robust? And that's why, I guess, they picked Monado, and that's mostly what we've been seeing, across the whole industry. Because it's not about XR exclusively at Collabora, right? You can think about the graphics side that I mentioned. There's a project called Mesa there, which is really, really important, with drivers for a lot of graphics hardware. And on the multimedia side, maybe you guys know GStreamer, which is like a huge multimedia codec and streaming open library. So yeah, it's open source is a topic by itself. Really, really interesting.
And as the world is more and more dependent to software, open source became more and more important. So the good thing is that more people understand how important, for example, working on a Linux computer is, using email providers who are not Google and Apple and others. And that's actually a very good thing. What we should maybe get the bow to OpenXR. So what I was wondering when I today discovered that there's actually something like Monado. I've never heard of it, to be honest, but that's why it's very good we are talking about it. What's the difference between Monado and OpenXR?
Okay, yeah, good question. So Monado is implementing the OpenXR API, right? Very important difference to understand. So OpenXR is an API, right? It's just like a specification. What OpenXR is, it's a bit immaterial, right? You can go on the website, you can type, OpenXR specification, and you'll get kind of a harsh, really long document to read. This is the very detailed explanation of all the APIs, input, output, assumptions, and stuff. This is the OpenXR API. Well, Monado here is one of the runtimes that do implement that runtime. And so exactly at the same semantic level as Meta Horizon or Google Android XR, right? It's the same. The only difference is that Monado is open source and meant to be working on multiple devices, right? So if you pick up Monado right now, you'll see that there's a lot of drivers in tree, drivers for XR headset 1, 2, and 3, and some trackers. And you can be pulling like, hey, trackers for 6DA, for body tracking. Like it is in the core of Monado to be able to run on multiple platforms, which is not always the case for a proprietary solution, right? They are basically meant to run on their own proprietary hardware. And so, yeah, so it brings me back to that ecosystem kind of diagram that we talked about maybe 15 minutes ago. So the runtime is at the lowest level, right? The runtime is what is directly interacting with the hardware. So the runtime is connecting to the headset, is talking to the display, is going to interact with the trackers, with the input controllers, right? This is the runtime, what the runtime is doing. Now, on top of the runtime, you could see that there's the OpenXR API right there, right? And what is talking OpenXR API? Well, the layer above, what we said, the middleware layer, right? Which are the engines, Godot, Unity, Unreal, StereoKit, Lover. And and then on top, as we said, like the applications in there.
So if that wasn't clear enough, in simple words, the runtime is the implementation of the standard. For example, SteamVR is one of the runtimes that also supports OpenXR standards. And then this runtime is actually talking to the hardware and has the software implementation. And then whatever is above it uses the standardized API to be able to talk to all the different kind of hardware.
Exactly, and the legal protection and all the membership at Kronos, all the IP framework and CTS considerations. Maybe you guys know about those. They all apply to the runtime layer, and this is an important distinction to make. Everything above, which basically is all the apps, the middleware, the engines, they are not, constraints by the CTS or by any, requirement to be OpenXR compliant. There's no such thing as OpenXR compliance in the middleware layer, right? This only pertains to runtime layer. Yep.
So if everybody would use Monado, although it's based on an open source thing like OpenXR, that would also be not a good thing, right? Because you would own how it would be implemented.
What do you mean not a good thing? Most of the open source related stuff are good. No. Just say it again. I'd like to understand your questions.
It's like you're not using OpenXR. You're using, of course, some kind of implementation framework. Like if everybody would use Monado again, you decide alone how Monado looks like, then it wouldn't be that open again, because who cares if Collabora would dictate what Monado looks like? I try to be the bad guy right now.
I'm really happy you bringing me on those tracks, because this is exactly what we are not. And it's really happy that you're talking about this, but this is exactly what we are not, right? So Monado being an open source project, there's no such thing. There's a such thing as, Monado being owned by Collabora. There's no such thing, right? So Monado is really a community project, which means that you, Thomas, can go, fork that project and start submitting patches and code to that project, and we are going to be reviewing. Monado just happens to be, have in its rank 4 or 5 core contributors. But we can say we are main maintainers of the Monado project, but there are more people out there in other companies that are core contributors to Monado, right? Mm-hmm. So this is really not strictly a Collabora thing. We just happen to be main maintainers. And now the cool thing is you're bringing me on the people aspect of it, right? Like the data sovereignty. And I'd say if everybody started using Monado, it would actually be a good thing, because it's not closed, right? It's open. When you pick up Monado, you actually exactly know what's talking to your hardware. You exactly know what's running under the hood, which is unfortunately not the case with most proprietary solutions, right? We don't know what's actually running ultimately. Like think about any phone that's out there. You don't really know what the code is doing. And this is exactly an open source we've been trying to fight against since 20 years at Collabora. We want to open the system. We want to give the ownership back to the people. Mm. And this is another topic in itself, right? We could be talking, you're spending an hour on this.
Yeah, I didn't want to start that discussion and go that deep into it, but was just an idea or something which I could bring up. What could possibly go wrong if everybody would use Linux? Nothing. Like, of course, it's a great thing. There are so many different Linux distributions out there, so that's actually a good thing to have. And it's actually not owned by anybody, like using Mastodon or something like that.
So that it is great to base it on the open software. It's just, I think, still important to remember, even if you're having that as a layer in your software stack, Monado somewhere in there, that doesn't mean that higher up, someone can still implement proprietary stuff, right? So you don't know what a different layer might be doing, still phoning home or whatever. It's just something important to remember. But in theory, it is good to at least know what this part of the software stack is doing.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Like a year ago or last summer, I gave a talk at AWE, talked about the promises of OpenXR. I was really excited there on the stage. And after the talk, people gathered around me in the hall and, mostly XR developers. And they said, hey, your talk was great. But that was a kind of a bit of a, dream world you described there, because we are, at day to day, we're struggling with a lot of stuff, some developers were sharing stories with me, hey, I have this completely OpenXR application that I developed. but he tried on that other runtime and it suddenly didn't work. Well, it's really no one's fault at the runtime level, right? It's because what you said, Thomas. Because when you develop an OpenXR application, you might be pulling some vendor specific dependencies at the middleware layer, right? Your engine, Unity, Unreal, just unknowingly, right, might be pulling some specific vendor platform dependencies that is just like locking you inside that ecosystem. And then as a developer, when you try your application or your APK, Android APK on that other headset, it doesn't work. I understand how it can be frustrating. It's exactly because of what you said, right? So there is some proprietary bits up the stack that I might be doing funny stuff under your feet. But, we're getting there. We're trying to, our goal at the Kronos group, right, is to make it better. The OpenXR standard, it's got a lot of extension right now, and we're trying to consolidate all the extensions back into the core spec so that in a few years from now, this will hopefully not happen and stop happening. That's the goal.
So just as a quick short excursion into a related topic, OpenUSD and GLTF are not exactly competing, but in somewhat competing in some subsection, I would say.
With OpenXR?
No, not with OpenXR. These two standards.
Right.
Yeah. So what's your perspective on it? Is there even a need for GLTF when OpenUSD is becoming more prevalent and can also do most of the stuff that GLTF can do? Because because I didn't mention it, GLTF is one of standard by Kronos as well, right?
Right. I mean, it's I've been in the market for years in the industry as consultants. The more players there's out there, usually the better we are. As end users, right? So I tend to dislike when a part of the industry, looks a little bit more like monopolies. I guess you guys will agree with me. So having more standards out there, even if there's some overlap, I think it's good. I wouldn't, of course, being at Kronos, my heart is closer to GLTF. Of course, you guys said it, but I say, hey, let the market decide, right? Fair game. I mean, OpenUSD's got is a very good size. GLTF's got advantages as well. There's good and bad in both, but let's just the market decide, right? And the adoption is just going to settle on the best solution and the best API, I think.
That was a very diplomatic answer, but we understood what the gist was of that, of course. I mean, the question, what I like to think also is like, do we need a winner? Like it's always like, if we think about monopolies, if we think about a huge market and stuff like that, then yes, we need one guy who owns everything, But I think we have to say goodbye to those thoughts. Like, we can have multiple standards at the same time. Okay, but then the resources will split and everything will be a little bit slower. But at the end, GLTF and OpenUSD are even starting to approach each other and look similar or work with each other. Then there are methods of compensating the differences. And it's good to have more standards. And I like that, to be honest.
Thomas, in general, I agree, but there's always the perspective of a standardization organization trying to make the standard. Like that's why these companies come together in order to, make it compatible across different vendors, basically, and make it not have like systems done in a similar way but slightly different everywhere, basically, right? So we have a world where we have some layer that we can all agree on, basically, and that's the purpose of a standardization. So there is of course that kind of not talking necessarily about monopolies, because we're still having many different vendors and providers using a standard, right? So I wouldn't say it's exactly the same thing. So in some areas, it is good to have like the definite standard and the standardization in order to know, this is how I can go forward. Of course, that doesn't mean there can't be multiple ones, but usually one prevails after a while.
In real life, I think this is what's happening very naturally anyway, right? I mean, we want to standardize it because we believe in what we do. The OpenXR standard, all the standards at Kronos are open or royalty free. I mean, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be outliers. I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, there is always going to be competing solutions, and I think it is healthy. It's healthy to have those alternative solutions out there. But let's not mix up things here, guys. OpenXR and the Kronos APIs are standards API, right? There's always people underneath implementing those APIs, and those are the companies making choices actually in what is my implementation going to look like? Am I going to open my ecosystem, and am I going to keep everything closed source? And the API itself, I think, in that regard, does not play such a crucial role into when you start discussing about monopolies and stuff. So yeah, we're just an API at the end of the day, right? That's what we do. We write APIs, we specify them, and then people are just free to implement the API or not.
In theory, and hopefully also in practice, it just makes the life easier of someone developing an application, because you don't need to support multiple different targets in your code, but you just develop towards a standard, right?
Exactly. Big companies, it's a consortium. Kronos is a consortium. All of those big companies that are OpenXR members, the Googles, the Metas, the Valve, the Picos of this world, they understood pretty easily that it's in everybody's favor, right? Because they want to create a market. They want to make it easy for content creators, for OpenXR developers to just easier to deploy to many headsets and SDKs, and ultimately it's just gonna invigorate the market for everyone, and that's the goal. Yeah.
So we have OpenXR, but then there are also device-specific features through OpenXR extensions. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, the devil's in the details. So the goal. So think about OpenGL or Vulkan, which are like graphics counterpart of what we do in the XR side, right? Those APIs have matured much more, right? So usually when you pick a Vulkan driver, or at the time OpenGL driver, it mostly was performing, your application was mostly performing the same or had the same behavior, whether you were on NVIDIA graphics card or AMD graphics card, right? It is not entirely true, but because those APIs were mature enough, this was mostly the case. We're not quite there yet with the OpenXR standard. Why? Because, XR is defining, and, XR, the market itself is defining and redefining itself as we speak. It's a very, very, young industry. It's a very young market. People are discovering new use cases all the time. Doing one step forward and two step backwards sometimes. This is happening these days. So, in this context, we are just a reflection of that in the OpenXR API side of things, right? So it's really important at this point to understand the difference between core specification and extension. So core specification is everything that, has gotten like very huge adoption among the OpenXR vendors around the table. So let's say stuff like the head pause, head tracking, right? Of course, like it's so core functionality that very early on, all of the vendors agreed on a standard API. And of course, those APIs ended up in what we call the core specification. And everything that's in this core spec, this is an absolute requirement for implementers, right? So let's say you are a platform developer, you got a headset, you're super excited, you got this new headset, You want to be OpenXR compliant. When you submit your compliancy to us at the Kronos Group, and we're going to be, evaluating your proposal, all of the core spec functionalities, they are absolutely required, and we're going to be testing all of those, right? And then if you pass all of the tests, you're going to get the OpenXR compliance. Yay, tag. Everybody's happy. But as you said, there are extensions, like all of the latest and greatest are vendor-specific features, like exotic eye detection or whatnot, right? That's really very recent. I mean, there's no way the OpenXR group have already had time to standardize on an API, and everything on that regard, you're just going to fall in extensions. And so this is the catch, right? So there's no compliance. I mean, all the extensions in the OpenXR API are optional. That is the catch. So let's say you as an XR developer, right? You're super excited about this new XR application that does like funny stuff and super exotic things, but you are maybe unknowingly depending on very, very latest features of that SDK, OpenXR SDK. Well, if those are extensions that are not implemented in headset 1 or 2 or 3 that you intend also to target, well, your application is not going to work on those other SDKs and headsets, right? That's the thing. So everything that's in the extensions, and you can take a look in our website, in the OpenXR specification page, it's really clear what are the APIs that are core spec and what APIs are actually extensions. Now, So
the path to core standard is that not only Apple is using something, but also all the other vendors, all the headset vendors is using it. And what your job is actually finding out if this is the case. And if it's not the case, it cannot be part of the core. It remembers me a little bit like the French do have something like that, but also we Germans have doing this with our language. Like, what is actually standard German language or French language? What they do is they look on the mouth of the people, and then they try to decide, okay, now we understand like 95% of all Germans use this word instead of the other one, old one. So this is the new standard. And then somebody at Duden Verlag, we call this in Germany, decides, okay, this is now the way we talk in Germany. That's what we observed. And this is why it's a standard, and we describe that standard. And some people use it as a Bible, which is, of course, the wrong way, because it haven't been the Bible before. How can it be the Bible now? But it's the way, the path to the core, to the standard. Is it like that?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. I think it's a good analogy. However, we have another level of interaction there. So we have like a 3-step process here, but it's really close to what you're describing. So let me take like 2 minutes to explain the process in itself. So we discussed like core spec, which is like the ultimate goal. And on the other far end of the spectrum are the extensions, right? Actually, in the extension world, there are subcategories, and it's interesting, and I think it's interesting to know about them. So when a company like Meta, Valve, or Google have a really very specific thing that they want to come out, of course, those companies have very aggressive milestones, right? They can't possibly wait on the standardization or organize them to wait and release their features. So what they do, they release their features, but they present the specification for it among the working group at Kronos. And so they will say, hey, we have that feature. Here's a vendor extension, like a specific vendor extension, right? And so it's why you see in the spec, XR _ vendor, there's a vendor tag there _ in the name of the OpenXR extension, right? For example, XR BD _ blah, blah, blah. This is for ByteDance, right? And so it's pretty obvious that this extension is only pertaining features that are on ByteDance headsets. This is the first level. Second level is exactly what you mentioned, right? We observe, where we discuss, every week we all gather those, company representatives around the OpenXR table, and we talk and we discuss. We're trying to find commonalities between this company's vendor extension and the other company's vendor extension. We're trying to find commonalities. And this is what we do, right? We federate people, which is like, hey, we're all working on hand tracking solutions right now. Like, couldn't there be like a multi-vendor thing that we can create? And this is exactly what we have. Level 2 of extension is actually an XR_EXT. So when you see it in the OpenXR spec, the EXTs are the multi-vendor extension. It starts with 2, let's say 3, typically 3 vendors got like hand tracking solutions. Well, we're going to be working towards an EXT hand tracking extension. And so this is already like, telling our XR developer, hey, if you're using that EXT extension, well, there's a good chance that the features, the application that you wrote on headset 1, might work on headset 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. And when something is even more, core and widely adopted, we have the KHR, which is KHR for Kronos, right? This is a ratified extension that is really on the way to becoming core spec, right? And the KHR is a ratified one. I'm not sure we want to get into those details, but there's some legal considerations that come with it, like guarantees and protections, and those KHRs are automatically ratified. And so once you have a KHR, we're going to be working like in a few months after this, like to probably make it fall into the core spec, so it becomes mandatory.
Yeah,
super interesting.
To simplify it a little bit, why would you need that? I think from a developer perspective, again, if you see those extensions popping up and going through the levels, you have a good understanding that it might be becoming a part of the standard, and going for those API calls earlier on, you're building your application for future compatibility rather than going only with the proprietary calls. So that's otherwise you could say, why even have it? You can just go through the proprietary API.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be, stuff that XR developer wants to target specifically, right? Like this cool, cool feature that only exists right now on that headset. You can be sure it's going to be presented in OpenXR as a solo vendor extension, right? And so the very important thing that we did at the Kronos group very recently, specifically at OpenXR, is that we released more information about, what is the level of support for those extensions in the engines that you might be depending on. I think it's a really good time for talking about this. Before that, it's extended information that we released, let's say like typically last year, 2 years ago, I admit, it was kind of a bit of a mess for XR developers to know, hey, I'm using those features, those extensions, how can I know that, they are or are not supported on the other engines or, other frameworks? It was kind of hard, but that's part of our goal at Kronos, is to give out more information, more clarity to our XR developers communities. And so, few weeks back, we released, XR developers know what we call the XR matrix, the OpenXR matrix. It's been out there for years. That matrix is kind of a grid, showing all of the runtimes, the Meta, Pico,
you showed that also on your slides, right?
Yes. And so you have all the runtimes there, and you also have all of the extensions that are supported or not, right, with information in that grid. And this tool has been there for literally years. But we were missing a component in there. We were missing actually the middleware layer that we talked extensively, you and I, throughout the call. And this is what we do now. We released another expanded matrix, also including the middleware components in there. So you can see like we started with 5 engines, but there are going to be more. So now for XR developers, it's way easier to see like, hey, if I'm picking that, if I'm relying on this and that extension, okay, I will be stuck to that ecosystem or not, right? I see that this level of support for that extension is elsewhere. Because I'll finish this segment with that. even if you've got vendor extensions, before it becomes an EXT, right? Before it becomes this multi-vendor thing that I mentioned, you can totally see and have other member companies implement that vendor extension. Not sure if it's clear. Let's say, for example, this happened with hand tracking, right? We had a hand tracking extension solely for ByteDance at some point. Well, that extension was implemented by other companies as well, right? So this matrix now is going to be showcasing, what is the level of support that you can hope for as an XR developer if you want to switch on that other SDK, on that other device.
Yeah. So in the early days, we almost always skipped OpenXR, to be honest, because you often caught more problems than you solved with it, because
right.
You were going for something fancy, and you knew it will be supported this way, and you were in a tricky turf because you didn't know exactly what is covered and what will be compatible anyway with the other headset in the future. But I would say since a few years, it's really, really, really a good idea to
right.
target OpenXR, because you get so much basically for free when you're developing against that, and then you can still add some of the other functionality on top.
Yeah, and what happened? The real thing that happened that's really great for the market. It happened like a year and a half ago. Like big companies, big implementers, and engine product owners, started electing their OpenXR plugins and OpenXR support as their main API.
Mm-hmm.
So that happened. This ship
like
has
with
sailed,
Unity, for example. Yeah,
exactly. And now, as OpenXR being elected the main API, I mean, there you go. We're just at the Kronos Group consolidating extension into the core spec, but we're gonna get there eventually, where even the fancy features are supported by OpenXR.
You mentioned CloudXR, NVIDIA CloudXR being based on Monado, right? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, they actually came out with this lately. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're talking about this remote, are you mostly talking about this rendering and feedback, like input-output layer, being adopted into the OpenXR standard also for
I'm not
AR, or?
Yeah, I'm not saying it will be adopted in the OpenXR standard. It's an important topic and discussion, of course, in the XR world, right? But you mentioned CloudXR. People know about this solution. It's a good example. This is almost exactly what I meant. However, CloudXR is right now is mostly like rendering focused, so it produces images. But what I'm talking about is even more, right? Like you want to have those pair of glasses, right? That pair of glasses is doing hand tracking. Like imagine how much compute there that we have needs for. Like it's doing like hand tracking detection. It's doing like scene understanding and perception, detecting all the surface around you. It's also doing graphics. It's like treating like so much compute that what I'm talking about is actually like I'm dreaming of an API, right? That would let OpenXR or XR developers like remote totally dynamically and transparently anything, depending on the network conditions, right? Imagine you are at home, you get a strong Wi-Fi, you're remoting all of this automatically and transparently to your home server, and as you walk out of the house, it automatically switches, and the hand tracking and perception compute just goes on the cloud and gets treated on very, very powerful servers and come back to you just completely transparently. That's a future I would love to see, right? And so there's certainly some questions we have to ask ourselves in standardization bodies around this.
And at the same time, we have the problem that especially people wearing glasses like mine or similar glasses in the future do not want to have some kind of cloud communication, because they are in situations where they want to have some kind of privacy. So they say, okay, I will decide to buy this headset when I know there will be no or very limited or very well done cloud communication, which is very secure and safe. So I see the problem here that in the future, when the devices explode, like not literally, but the of course the market explodes when Google and Apple and
Right.
everybody will join the hype about those small glasses, that there might happen that OpenXR has to work or think about what might be new standards concerning those glasses. And this makes actually maybe also sense, because the compute gets better and better, and not everything has to be done on the device, but some use even a puck, how you say in English? Yeah, puck. So there might be in the future some new challenges to OpenXR concerning those glasses. Yeah, some things will happen in the cloud, some things not.
But privacy, Thomas, very good comment. The privacy, really, it really is what's going to make you choose open source implementation instead of, it's not really an API problem, you know what I mean? So the API is there to describe, what is the expected behavior, what is the kind of data or metadata is going to be shipping, cloud and receiving back. And, the standard be open. We can certainly, security and privacy is really important at Kronos. But this is not really an API problem, right? It's an implementation one.
Mm-hmm.
What is actually happening under the hood on that server or in my headset? This is why you probably are going to be a good candidate, picking a totally open source based system.
Absolutely.
And then you can see what's happening in the code. You have access to the code. You know exactly what's running on your hardware, right?
But at the same time, you also said we're using a layer or parts of the whole stack and not everything. So Meta can use OpenXR for their glasses and still use the images, collect them, and send them to Kenya to train the new AI models with it.
Absolutely, yeah. So, it's an open standard. Everybody's free to implement it. Yes.
So the question was maybe more like on-prem versus cloud. And then it's getting more interesting. Let's say that OpenXR also is aware of what develops in the future, which might be even more sensitive to CPU and power usage and stuff like that, which is also very interesting. Like, okay, maybe there will be new standards concerning those aspects.
Right. And there will, we're not going to talk about virtual worlds and the metaverse, but there, I see, if you think about compute that we need, AI versus XR, machine learning and AI, there's going to be so many standardization needs in the future. You're absolutely right. But yeah, it's about like keeping all that in mind, keeping the privacy issues in mind, keeping the safety issues in mind. I think we're pretty, doing a very good job at Kronos to keep all this in mind for future conversations. I cannot, tell you guys what we're working on right now, we're planning to work on, but we are working very hard, just gathering every week of the year to discuss those things.
My next question would have been what's up next for OpenXR, but you just said you cannot tell.
Well, I can disclose one thing. Because we talked about it, I told in, I think, three talks right now. So we're working on multi-app, which is pretty cool. It's not about remoting or cloud offloading as we discussed. It's a completely different thing. That Pokemon, right? That Pokemon running on your table, right? Remember this? It was, avoiding the obstacles, which were real world objects. Well, that Pokemon would be really cool if you could have another application that's floating around your desk, right? Like a calendar, right? What if this Pokemon could occlude the calendar while passing in between you and the calendar, right? And this is what we're working on right now, like letting the XR developers in a very standardized way specify, hey, I want an application 1, 2, what are the bounding blocks? Are they interacting with each other? How? Pretty exciting stuff, but I'm afraid I cannot say much more than that.
I have to say both of those topics that you mentioned, I think, are very essential. The cloud offloading for more than just the rendering, and also the multi-app perspective, because they're both not solved problems, I would say, and they're extremely important for an actual augmented reality environment to work properly like you want it to work. So I think that's exciting that that the group is working on those topics.
Great. And we're going to have announcements soon. I'm excited on my side, but you guys should.
Great. Where can we see those announcements? I would assume, of course, on your LinkedIn, which is not open source, but you're still there.
So the announcement about this very topic that I just mentioned were exclusively, I think, in talks that I gave. So you guys should, try to dig my talks. There was one at XR Expo. There was one at AWE last year. So yeah, you can certainly find some of that. I think also some journalists retook my words. Just search for multi-app OpenXR and you'll certainly find some information about that.
What are the next conferences we're gonna be able to meet you?
Yes. So I'm preparing AWE USA in 2 weeks. I'll be in Long Beach for AWE, giving a talk on behalf of Kronos there. It will mostly talk about stuff that we discussed, you and I, guys. And the next one after that is going to be IBC. I'm going to also be probably giving a talk at XR United in Brussels. So I'm really excited. I mean, this is my job, right? Just spreading the good words and good news about OpenXR and the benefits. That's what I do.
One more thing we have to, I know we wanted to wrap up right now, but one thing we have to mention is XR Guild, because it's such a cool thing that it exists. Very briefly, maybe. But in theory, I joined as well a while back, but because it's still somewhat America focused. Most of the meetings are at night, and I never happen to have time when the actual meetings are. But you're a mentor there, right? And it's generally about, and you feel free to add to it. It's generally about subscribing to values in when you develop extended reality and saying it needs to be open, it needs to be safe and including everyone, right? So maybe a shout out from your side as well.
Right. So I joined. I mean, I discovered the guild maybe 2 years ago as its inception, a year and a half ago, and then it was so in line. I mean, take a look at our raison d'être and so I'll just reboot, Thomas. All right.
It's fine. You can also say it in French. The AI will translate it.
I mean, it's the XR Guild. Take a look at our webpage and the values there. I mean, there's such a 100% match with what I'm already working on, Collabora and Kronos, right? The openness and all that. But more than that, the XR Guild is about ethics, ethical XR practice, which I really like. It's like a way to say, hey, I'm in the XR industry. I pledge to those values. And so I joined the XR Guild. I'm now also a mentor. Pretty excited because I'm going to be mentoring people like specifically for around the AWE conference time frame. But yeah, you should check it. You should check out, like everybody's listening to that podcast in the XR industry should check out the xrguild.org and join. It's about getting just momentum, like critical mass of people that do care, right, about those values that we list on our website.
Yes, very nice. And if you want, dear listener, to hear more about what the Kronos Group is doing, and for example, also what the Metaverse Standards Forum is doing, I want to poke your nose to episode 117, because there I spoke with Neil Trevitt at the United XR edition last year. So you cannot miss that. It's a very nice, it's a very nice, some would say, very nice episode. You should actually listen. And yeah, this was very great. Frédéric, thank you very much for joining us. I learned a lot.
Guys.
It was really nice. And Thomas, do you want to lead us out?
Oh, it's my turn to start. And that was episode 130 of Spatial Realities.
If you enjoyed this podcast, we'd really appreciate if you recommended it to others, for example, your mother. Feel free to share the episodes on social media, send them to colleagues and friends, and leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, a quick reminder about our Discord server. You can find a link to it in the show notes or at spatialrealities.de.
My name is Thomas Bedenk.
I'm Thomas Riedel.
Thanks for tuning in and see you next time.
See you.
See you.
Bye.